Up next in our look at the new Regiments of Renown which have come in Dawnbringer's Book 4. Moving on from Manfred, we are taking a look now at the newest Mortarch on the block and the second most expensive one, Ushoran, the Mortarch of Delusion, and his Summerking's Entourage. This one can be yours to add into your Soulblight, Nighthaunt or Ossiarch Bone Reaper army for the cost of 670 points, and it's another one that I think is quite good. It's got a lot going for it, however it does come with a few notable downsides. Once more, you do lose your battle traits from the Flesh Eater Court's army, so you don't get any Grand Courts, you don't get your Feeding Frenzy, you don't get your Noble Deeds, but there are a few things that get added in this regiment to make up for it, and of course you get to add another gorgeous model to your army in the form of Ushoran himself, so that may well be a worthwhile selling point right from the get-go. For the 670 points you pay, you get Ushoran, 10 Crypt Guard and 3 Morbeg Knights, so it's a nice little selection of hard-hitting, not necessarily the most durable, but definitely very solid damage output units. And in terms of the discount you get by bringing this regiment, we have Ushoran, who is 460 points, the Crypt Guard are 140, and 3 Morbeg Knights are 150, so this separately would run you 750 points, so bringing the regiment does make you a nice little 80 point saving alone. Of course, that does take into account the loss of some of your battle traits, but it is still a welcome little bonus. In terms of what you actually get rules-wise though, you get Deathless Retainers, which returns your 6-up ward save. Maddening Radiance makes up for the loss of your Feeding Frenzy battle trait and is slightly improved in some ways. It just gives you +1 to your attacks, to your weapons, while a unit is wholly within 12 inches of Ushoran, so that is fairly nice. It gives you bonus output not only from Ushoran himself, but also the Crypt Guard and the Knights, all of which, as I said, can be fairly heavy hitters in their own right. It's a really nice way to not have to worry about your Noble Deed points or anything like that, just to get a small condensed set of units that you can just put on a flank or put in the center of the board and just move up and utterly demolish anything that gets in their way. This is very much a straightforward damage output regiment. It brings Ushoran to 4 attacks with his Scepter and up to 11 attacks with his Claws, whilst the Crypt Guard jump to a solid 3 attacks each, hitting and wounding on 3s with -1 rend, and the Morbeg Knights move to 3 attacks with their Lances and 4 attacks with their Teeth and Claws, which are 2 damage. So everything here definitely can put the hurt onto the enemy, and as I said, the fact this doesn't depend on you racking up those Noble Deed points is really nice. This is just a really dependable, always on as long as you are in range rule, and it's just a solid boost to everything in this regiment. On top of the damage output, you also get some incredible recursion in this set. As a replacement for the Summon Loyal Subjects rule, which in the Battle Tome allows you to spend your Noble Deed points to return a destroyed unit with half the models back to your army, the Regiment of Renown gets Summon Deluded Throngs. Now this doesn't depend on Noble Deed points, instead it just brings back your Crypt Guard or your Knights once per battle at full strength as long as Ushoran is alive. So you can essentially get up to 2 units of 10 Crypt Guard and 2 units of 3 Morbeg Knights out of this regiment if both of them get killed over the course of the battle. They do have to come into the board 6 inches from the edge and 9 inches from enemy units, and as I said, they can only be replaced once. But this is a really strong rule. From a sheer points perspective, it means that this Regiment of Renown can, in theory, get you 1040 points of usable units over the game, which is just fantastic. And it means you can do some sneaky objective grabbing late game as your units come back on from all over the board. And it's just going to mean, as long as Ushoran is alive, the threat of those 2 units coming back is just going to, if nothing else, be a massive thorn in your opponent's side. So on the face of it, it seems to be a really great regiment. You get a lot of bang for your buck, you get the amazing War Scroll in Ushoran himself, not to mention the Crypt Guard and the Morbeg Knights, you get some fantastic recursion. The big, and I would say one of the only issues I have with it, is that because you don't get a lot of your usual Flesh Eater Court's battle trait, and you can't bring this in a Flesh Eater Court army, you do lose quite a lot of value, especially out of Ushoran. And that's because quite a lot of his abilities and cost is tied up in buffing a few of your generic battle trait abilities. Things like his Epicenter of Delusion won't come into play at all because you don't get to choose a delusion by bringing this regiment. His Carrion King ability won't come into play because you don't get Feeding Frenzy in this regiment. And so, at the very least, two of the big things that he boosts in a Flesh Eater Court army don't actually get any use whatsoever with him when he's part of the Summerking's entourage. Now, he is still good. He's got a brilliant stat block. He is a 2-cast wizard. He can put out a load of damage, and he still gets to debuff enemy leadership with his Shroud Cage Fragment. That, and the fact you can get potentially 20 Crypt Guard and 6 Morbeg Knights to go along with him, does, in my opinion, make this regiment very much worth considering. It's just the big question you have to ask yourself is whether that value, which is pretty much just sheer brutal damage output, because that's all this regiment really does. It doesn't bring any fancy tricks or shenanigans like Manfred's does. It's just brutal melee damage output. And is that enough to warrant giving up some of the other stuff you could get by just bringing more Nighthaunt, more Soulblight, or more Ossiarch Bone Reapers? And then if you decide you do want that extra damage output and you are going to bring the Summer King's entourage, it's also worth considering who's going to benefit from it, because Soulblight and Bone Reapers, I'm not entirely sure they need that addition. Does bringing this regiment bring you enough extra that you couldn't replace by just bringing more Stalkers for your Ossiarch Bone Reapers, or 750 points worth of a few characters and a big blob of Graveguard or Blood Knights in your Soulblight? I'm not 100% sure. I would say for me personally, I think the regiment does add a lot to something like Nighthaunt, because there are at least a few combos that work there. On the face of it, the regiment does add some great output for Nighthaunt, which can sometimes struggle with a lack of rend. And then whilst they won't proc things like Wave of Terror, because they are of course not Nighthaunt, they do on the flip side actually benefit quite a lot from things like Wave of Terror, specifically the stun effect, which if you manage to get off on an enemy unit with another charging Nighthaunt unit, will bring Ushoran's mace to say -3 rend, for instance. So that can be incredibly scary. And I think on top of that, Ushoran's Shroud Cage Fragment does tie in very well and combo quite well with things like the Nighthaunt Terrify rule, which means enemy units within 3 inches can't use Inspiring Presence. So you can also very much do a form of leadership bomb with Ushoran and just make more enemy models flee from battle shock tests. So for me personally, I think overall it's a very cool regiment of renown. It can put out a ridiculous amount of damage. It gets you a solid amount of points for the initial cost. And of course it has some really good recursion. But I probably wouldn't bring it if I was playing my Soulblight or my Ossiarch Bone Reapers. I do think it adds a lot to a Nighthaunt army though. It gives you that really hard-hitting set of units that you can charge into a scary enemy unit and just wipe them out. And I would personally almost be using the rest of the Nighthaunt army to support Ushoran and the Knights, trying to proc things like your Wave of Terror debuffs to neuter an enemy, and then just make Ushoran and the other Flesh Eater Court units even more devastating when they do their attacks, and just let Ushoran go to town on your opponent with his leadership debuff. So for me, I think it's a really fun regiment. I do like it. I love the fact that you can bring Ushoran in other armies, and I certainly think it is worth bringing just from the fact that you can get over 1,000 points worth of models for just 670 points essentially. But for me, this is clearly the best in a Nighthaunt army. But as always, I'd really love to know what you think. Do you like the Summer King's entourage, or do you think it is one of the weaker regiments of renown? Let me know all of your thoughts and what army you would most like to bring it in down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.